That's three. Yeah.
Two of them are going to be last. Join us in process.
But you got almost behaved for yourself.
Running tower all day, whenever Dave says go.
Dave, are you all set to go? Okay. We'll call this meeting to order. It is September 16th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Dave has asked me to remind everyone, if you are speaking, please try to speak into your mic so we can capture it on the recording. We'll start this meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call. Counselor Ray, here. Resident Majerus Collins.
Here.
Counselor Pettingill.
Here.
Resident Ed Hill.
Here.
Selectman Rennie.
Here.
Resident Stefanik.
Yes.
Counselor Ward.
Here.
Counselor Lunt.
Here.
Counselor Walker. Resident Pelletier.
Here.
City Manager Kroll.
Here.
Resident Titus. Selectman Nichols.
Here.
And we still have a vacancy in District 7 for the resident position.
So we were
We now have 11 members present. As a reminder, binding votes. Oh, we're at 12. Counselor Titus.
Sorry, I'm late.
No
What
worries.
district am I here?
That's you.
I was over that meeting, wondering who was
So we still do not have someone for the District 7 vacancy, and so we'll move on to item 5, consideration of the September 9th, 2020 Budget Committee meeting minutes for approval.
I move that we waive the public reading minutes and find an acceptable final signature.
Motion from Mr. Rennie,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Pelletier. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Looks to be unanimous, 12.
I was abstaining.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see that. So 11:01, Hill abstaining. Thank you for clarifying that. When we do vote again, we're going to hold our hands up for Sandy again. We'll move into our review of budgets. I see District Attorney Robinson is here to present the first couple, so take it away, sir.
Thank you. My name is Andrew Robinson. I am the district attorney for District 3. District 3 is comprised of 3 counties, Androscoggin County, Franklin, and Oxford counties. This becomes significant later when we talk about joint budgets and also positions where contributions are being made from the other counties.
Can I stop you for 1 second, Andy? Please, does he need a mic as well?
If you could, agree.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. And so focusing on the budget that I think is probably the most significant of what we're talking about this evening will be budget 1015. And that's the one that is directly related to our office. And so if appropriate, that would be the one that I would start with. But if it's better to go in order or if there's a sequence, I'm happy to address it in a specific sequence.
Does anyone have a preference? We'll start with 10:15.
Okay, 10:15 for us. Things I would like to draw to your attention. Take a look at line 3211. You'll see that we eliminated the $17,160 for the hope or for this was monies assigned to internships. to pay for law school interns. You'll also, if I can draw your attention over to line 4675, you'll see a decrease in the amount of $23,000.90. This is actually a ship finally coming into the harbor that I've been talking about for the last couple of budget cycles when we were converting our software, and it was going to have a cost savings for the county. But that 23,000, I do want to make sure it's clear. If you take a look at line 4015, you'll see an increase of $4,466. That's actually payment for the software. It's being moved to the line 4015 because it's actually being handled through MEDAX, which is a consortium that all DA's offices contribute to. So when you see $23,090, it's actually closer to $19,000 because there's a $4,000 difference between those two lines. You'll also see that there are several lines where we did no increase at all. And then if you take a look at 7325, you'll see that we zeroed out the furniture and fixtures. All of those decreases were before we met with the commissioners, recognizing that we needed to try to keep our budget as low as possible, and that we did have one major ask this budget cycle, so we were trying to offset the request. When we came before the commissioners, we were then asked to reduce our budget another $14,000, which was, let me preface this by saying, look, I'm a team player. I understand the circumstances that we're in. I try to make sure that that our office is contributing to whatever effort the county needs to make. But it was somewhat discouraging and disheartening because we started cutting things that I knew we can live without, I guess, the copiers that are starting to fail. We were going to try to make it last another year. But then we started getting into transcript lines, which is what we pay for when there's an appeal, and we need to be able to pay for the recording of what happened in the courtroom. And this year, so many novel things have happened. I'm somewhat surprised that we don't have an inundation of appeals based on all of the things that were occurring differently than normal. But made the cuts. We also cut back on the computer line, which makes me nervous because it means what we have currently is a 4-year cycle, so computers get to 4 years old before they get updated. It's going to push us into a 5-year cycle, but we, in fact, made the cuts to get the $14,000 out. So I mentioned all of these things so that you're aware of our efforts to try to keep the budget down. There is one increase that I think is substantive enough that we should be talking about it, and that is we have had a trial assistant position in our office that was funded by the federal grant that is ending this fiscal year. This is somebody who carries a portion of the workload that's been assigned to all of the trial assistants. The loss of this position means everybody has to absorb that position. And this is by folks who are already overworked and incredibly stressed, not just because of COVID-19, but because of the nature of our work. So our hope and our efforts were all designed to try to keep that position and be able to allow it to go into the general fund. There are areas that are unique about this year. You'll notice our electricity bill is phenomenally low. But that has everything to do with COVID-19 and trying to rotate people through, and the occasion when people were working remotely, we use less energy. All the other lines, I think you'll see, especially after the last series of reductions, are pretty nominal, or that any difference would be nominal, but I'm happy to address any of them or answer any questions you have.
Mr. Titus.
Hey, Andrew.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Still Andy behind this mask.
Just a couple of Andys.
Just a couple of questions. One of them was, and this is kind of a COVID-related question. Did we pay everybody the regular salary with no interruptions to the entire COVID closed down, shut down, whatever, and everybody could work from home, even if they couldn't? Was there any savings at all that we see in that, or was that just?
No, everybody kept working. Our function is so mission critical, there was no interruption. And it's pretty remarkable what we did. There was a lot of remote working occurring, but you'll recall, we've had conversations about how I was taking steps to make it so we could work in courtrooms. You know, we were going wireless in our software and with our equipment, so that when it became necessary to work remotely, everybody was able to take their equipment home and still perform their same job functions. So the answer is, everybody continued working the exact same rate, number of hours, the amount of effort, everything was occurring. And so their pay stayed the same at the same time. So there was never any hiatus, or somebody was just, there was no work to do. We were scrambling to keep up with this the whole way through. And it got crazy for a while there, but things have settled in.
Well, thank you for the cuts that you put in there for the commissioners. I really do appreciate that. The position you talked about, was a federal position. How long is that? Is that like a 3-year grant or 2-year grant?
2-year grant.
Then we have to fund that for an additional anyway, right? Or is there any stipulations to that?
No, that this grant ends on December 31st.
We're not required to fund it ourselves for 1 additional year or something like that, or 2
No.
additional years now, so it's done. So when we did this originally, we needed that person.
That's absolutely right. And it has been a, you know, I think, I know there's always a feeling of, hey, you know, you can't hoist a position on us that, you know, that we never originally put in the budget because the feds picked it up. But in this case, it was one that we had it, it's been dedicated towards domestic violence, and it has been paid for by the feds for 2 years. So I feel like we've gotten 2 years, someone else picking up the tab, and now it's
So
time.
my only concern, that's just an opinion, that we should be really careful about something that's given to us free. Because we know we've got to pay for it eventually, so I just, my thought is we got to be really careful.
You know,
Even though it's free for 2 years, it's now ours for the rest of eternity.
It will not surprise you that whenever I think about these things, I always remember the conversations we've had under different budget things. And so I knew a concern that you had in that area. And I try to be a good steward with public funds, and we usually try to come in, you know, with tight budgets, but recognizing their heavy cost. This year, we've done everything we can to strip out more than what I'm comfortable with, but recognizing the circumstances we're doing this in.
Now, going back to the printing and reproduction, let's cut that out. We're still, you know, doing a fair amount of good old-fashioned copying as opposed to scanning and printing using printers, keeping documents in the cloud, so to speak. Are we old-fashioned Konica type copiers, double collated and all that stuff? Is that?
Yeah,
we
well,
can't do that with just regular printers?
you know, I take a certain level of pride with the amount of work we do digitally and how we have been moving away from printing. But the copiers we're talking about are when you've printed a motion and you need a copy to be able to hand to somebody because we're walking into the courtroom. So these are copiers that are essentially for the day of when we're doing the work. And copiers serve a function that goes a little bit farther than printers, right? Because it makes it so you have an exact replica of whatever you're submitting or putting in. So it's not something where it's as easy to just print it because you want the stuff, the documents with your signatures already on it, an exact replica. We do not use them, and I think that's how we've gotten by so long. I'm offering tours of this printer. It's pretty remarkable, you know, it stands out at how old it is. But it's how we've gotten this far without actually replacing it. And look, we can talk about printers, but I'm riding the wave, and we're going to try one more year with this thing and see how far we go. If not, I'm just going to stroll down to Larry's office, you know, start making my copies there. Just won't make eye contact, that's all.
Terrific, thank you very much.
Mr. Kroll.
Andy, thanks for the work that you've done on this. I think the work that you've done for setting us up for digital IT component, which was a great help for us during COVID, obviously, being able to work remotely. What's next? I think, you know, I know that you're in one of those departments that the workload's not going to slow down.
Right.
It's going to continue to increase. So as you're planning, just so that we can be thinking about what's the next, you know, steps you're going to be taking as far as what we can see on the horizon when it comes to either staffing or future support?
Where we are, I have been pushing the state through the Attorney General's office, the Governor's office, and then the Appropriations Committee about getting more prosecutors, because heard my long-standing angst about how much work we're being asked to do and how it violates the rules or the numbers that the American Bar Association says prosecutors should be handling. That effort always requires, trying to get more attorneys in. The correlation to that would be, look, if you add attorneys, then there may be a need for more support staff to help them as they're doing their work. The only other area that I can think of where support staff may become more as a result of modernization is as agencies are modifying the way they're producing videos, because we are now entering an era where it's not just cruiser cameras, but we're starting to talk about lapel cameras, and the agencies are having to figure out how they're going to handle this digital medium, and some of them are starting to suggest, well, we need your office, Andy, to do a lot of the downloading and the processing. We can't, we've got to be able to store it in our own individual repository. Right now, we're doing it through ShareFile. I have a little bit of concern that as that pressure comes and we go through that back and forth of who's responsible for providing the medium or the material, if it falls on my office, then we're going to need people who can spend the time downloading and uploading that currently is being done by law enforcement agencies. So that's on the horizon. I think this is an important question. I will tell you, this year, I feel like every day feels like a new horizon. And I'm facing different issues that I never expected I would face. So I haven't given a lot of thought about the grand scheme plan and where things are going, but those off the top of my head are the only areas where I can think of that would cause an increase in staffing or a necessity that doesn't exist today.
Any further questions? Mr. Majerus-Collins?
Mr. Robinson, I find it continually frustrating that you and your office are the subject of public criticism from the same kinds of folks who are constantly trying to deny you the resources that you need to effectively do your job. And I guess I would ask you, do you consider any of the commissioner's cuts to be seriously detrimental to your ability to have a functional office and do the people's business? And if so, what would those be?
Look, I started the conversation with, look, I want to be a part of the team, and I know 2020 is a bananas year, and so decisions are being made that we never have to make. Frankly, the day we made the decisions on how we were going to handle those cuts, I had a pit in my stomach for the rest of the day trying to figure it out. If you said to me, where do I think the issues come? It would be with the computers, because we rely so heavily on technology, and I know we're going to start pushing those 5-year dates, right? There are some lines that I feel like I'm trying to read tea leaves, like the transcript line. I've communicated right out the gate. I'm worried that we're going to get inundated with appeals, and there's going to be there's going to be a need to go back and find out what was done in the courtroom. And so we lowered that line, but frankly, if someone does an appeal and I need the transcript, I'm just going to come in the red on that line. There's nothing I can do. We're going to have to go get them. So we're looking at those different lines. But ultimately, you've expressed a frustration that I often think about. But this is one where if everybody had to take the cuts, then the DA's office is taking its cuts. And we're going to come back in 2021 and we're going to say to you, woo, this is what happened, and this is what it looked like, and we'll talk about it then. So I'm not asking that my office be looked at in a light different than any other office, but if you were thinking about going after increasing those numbers, those areas, the computers and the transcript line are the ones that I would look to immediately and say, that's what hurt.
Well, let me follow up with the transcripts, because 4 years or 5 years in a computer, I understand can make a big difference, but that's also a pretty clear decision that you can just try to stretch the computer to last another year, and hopefully it does. The transcripts, I'm really puzzled by as well, because you said that if you end up needing more than what's allocated to your 1,700 as opposed to the 3,700 that you predicted, you're just going to have to spend it. It's not optional. And so this would strike me as sort of a fancy land cut, because if you need it, then you're going to spend it, because it's obligatory. And your best estimate for how much you would need for transcripts is 3,700, presumably that's what's in your request. So would it be fair to say that, you know, I mean, if you needed less than 3,700, you wouldn't, there's no way to spend extra money on transcripts that you don't need. And so help me understand here what they're thinking behind that.
Well, what their thinking was, and I was pleased with it, was here's the number, now you go figure it out. You know what I mean? Like that was the discussion that we had, and so it gave a level of discretion, you know, on our part. So, and I thought, well, that was actually as good a way to do it as any. What will happen is, if I can't meet that budget line, you know what I do. I end up not ordering folders, and we clip files together until we get to the next budget cycle, and I can figure out, go get folders. Or I'll find some other line that we're not exceeding, and I'll try to cut back on that. So I don't know where we make up for it, but we will, because we understand it's not a blank check. We gotta match our budget, so that's what will happen.
And so that would ultimately then just be a result of the commissioners wanting a nice round number.
It wasn't that arbitrary. It ended up being a somewhat round number, but they had a theory on what they wanted that cut to be in relation to non-salary expenses for each department. I'm not sure if it was, I'm trying to remember, but I think it was correlating to the percentage decrease. They were trying to get the entire budget down a certain percentage amount, and so every budget, non-salary, was asked to reduce to that level. That's where that number came from.
Okay.
And I'm not,
It's a remarkable coincidence.
well, and you know, the goal, there was a goal,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm saying, listen, you know, I'm an optimistic person, and I believe in working together as a team. And so, you know, when they said we need to do this, no grousing on our part. I'm communicating with you. It hurt. It's somewhat discouraging, but we're doing our part. And I really do appreciate you talking about it in the terms that you are and considering it. But if all my other colleagues, all the other agencies in the county are having to go through this process, I do not want to be treated differently. I want to be amongst all of us, pulling together, trying to get through this.
Can I interject one thing? So Andy was mostly correct that it was an effort to take down percentages outside of salaries. When we get to Ms. Molina's emergency management budget, that was handled differently, and so we'll need to go deeper into that, just so folks know. It was taken line by line, and she was told where to reduce, which is very different from the other budgets. So you weren't there for that, but just for context for folks.
Yeah.
Did you have further questions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say I give you a lot of credit for where you're coming from and your willingness to, you know, sort of to go that way. And my attitude towards your office is not going to be wholly different than my attitude towards a lot of the things in this budget, because I think that this county does important work, and I get frustrated with the constant effort to undermine that work for relatively little savings when there are other savings to be made in other places. You know, I mean, I guess I would suggest that maybe the commissioners could rethink that, and that I would move that we add $1,000 in the transcript line to erase half of the cut, and to bring it more in line with what you think you might end up needing.
I hear a motion from Mr. Majerus Collins to add $1,000 to line 4880. Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Second from Mr. Pelletier. Any discussion on that motion? On that motion, yeah. Go ahead, Mr. O.
Just to add on to that, this is gonna help me decide on, you know, which way to go with it. Are there any cuts that you think actually cost you money? That are kind of penny smart, dollar stupid?
That's a fair question, but in the DA's office, I don't think so. I don't think there is a the worry I have about the computers is there's going to be a day of reckoning. There's going to be a catch-up point, and so we've always limited it to a cycle of 4, you know, this specific number of computers, 4 for staff. I think it's 2 for attorneys, and we cycle through so that we always have a specific number as we go through. At some point, if the computers fail or falter, then we're gonna need more than that, and it means a greater cost. But so it just means that there's gonna be a larger lump sum at some point that may be necessary. We have them, we'll milk them as long as we can, treat them like a copier, we're gonna go as far as we can, but that's a concern of mine, because I have made us so reliant on the technology. But as far as I think a very straightforward analysis, like you're doing, not in my office, no. We either have it or we don't. We're not a profit-making agency. We do our job. They focus on it.
Hopefully you can give me a little latitude. I'm sure some of the people that are home watching this. I've heard that there's been enforcing like all the registrations and stuff like that. Usually they go to trial if there's so many months over, they don't pay a fine. And I don't know how the revenue sharing works on something like that, but I was wondering, along those lines, is that something where if you have a little money up front, or you're basically just all men on deck and you're just trying to handle the important things and that just has to get pushed to the side in order to function?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. Your specific example about registration, though, is that during the governor's emergency proclamation, there actually became there became a waiver on registration, so that we weren't able to enforce.
But this was happening before that.
And there are occasions where we will bring, like say, what you're talking about, the suspended registration, and sometimes that's if you haven't paid your tolls. As you go through, they'll suspend your registration, and then you continue to operate. A lot of times there's an issue about notice on whether you actually knew you were suspended. And then others are simply what we say is, go pay your tolls, go square up with the state, and then we've addressed the underlying issue rather than make somebody a criminal for it. If
I certainly think people would appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was just curious if you guys are, losing substantial money, if that was an issue because of all the, basically amnesty for people to register their cars.
Those funds go to the general fund for the state of Maine, so it doesn't affect our office or
I
the
didn't
county.
think it did.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Further
I'll
discussion,
support the motion.
Okay.
Just,
further discussion on line 4080, adding $1,000 back for transcripts. I will just remind everyone before we vote that we need 11 votes in the affirmative for something to be binding, and we won't revisit it again, but if that does not happen, we'll revisit it again on the last night. So all those in favor of that motion? I can't see down there. No? Okay, so we have 4. All those opposed? 7 opposed. Do you need those names? Am I missing someone? I can't see you, Counselor Lund, sorry. What was your vote?
Opposed.
Opposed. It was 4-8, sorry about that. The motion fails.
Madam Chair?
Mr. Randall?
I'll make a motion for the 700,000.
Motion to approve the district attorney's budget 1015 at 700,000. Do I hear a second?
Second.
From Mr. Rennie. Any discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Ward? Yeah.
This budget actually is a 1% increase, and after having to absorb an 8% increase, it's already stated in the salaries line. I applaud his effort for everything that's done. I think the motion stands as it reads.
Any further discussion? I actually have a question for Mr. Post. And I think Mr. Ward actually brought it up recently, so I just want to give him credit where it's due. So I see the furniture and fixtures line is zeroed out. Is the county a member of the Sheriff Center?
What name am I again?
The Sheriff Center in Lewis? It's still in Boston. Yeah. It's, how would you describe it?
It's actually a subsidiary of Auburn Public Schools. The fact is everything that's collected that's donated from everything from Bowdoin College to whatever. There's furniture and pictures and everything else that's actually available out of the Martell School at present. Lisa Rodriguez is actually the person associated with that, and if you guys are a member, it may be something that's been beneficial. It's been a minor win song for us from the municipal side of things for the same budgetary concerns, because working with Lisa through the sale of that location, it was identified that we were able to do so as well too. So we have the same pressures, and it's worth a lot to be able to do that. Because at Bowdoin College, when they re-upped it, they had classrooms and stuff that actually just ended up being able to be available.
Something to look into.
Yeah, so it's stuff that's tired but not totally retired for furniture
I get
and
it.
fixtures, and I think there's some other oddities in there, and I don't think the
She
Martell.
gets everything. In fact, if there's a need associated with that, you can go to the classroom, that's the primary, but the municipalities may have that as well. If you reach out to me tomorrow, Mr. Post, or remind me, I'd gladly get you Lisa's contact information.
And that could benefit all departments, but just since you zeroed out that line, I want to make sure you know about it too. Any further discussion on, where are we? We have a motion on the table from Mr. Nichols and Mr. Rennie for $700,000. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? It looks unanimous to me, 12-0. What budget would you like to move on to next?
If we do, now we just go through them, so we get to 1,005, it's called the Superior Court line, or the Superior Court budget. I like that, because it makes me feel like I'm speaking on behalf of the court. And in this line, probably the most unique component to it is the witness fees. This is the line that the district attorney's extradition fund reimburses. So you can make this number whatever you like, and whatever funds we use in that line, we reimburse. There's a revenue line from our extradition account, so we pay it back. So, I mention it because it's one where whatever that number is, it's a wash, so you can set it wherever you like. And then commissioners had reduced the postage to $100 just because we weren't using it. This is where we used to mail out checks, but now we try to write them while we're in the courtroom to witnesses as they're coming, so we try to obviate the need for postage. And so I'm fine with the $100 reduction.
Make a motion that we approve the $11,100.
Second.
We have a motion from Mr. Rennie, a second from Mr. Hill. Any further discussion on 1005? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous, 12-0.
Mr.
Yep.
And we tried to actually get some of these revenues as we're going through and make it easier on the night of.
Sure.
Revenue 9562. Andy's point is, it's going to be 11,000, so I would recommend that we actually approve that one as is as well too.
Can I see what?
Revenues, we go to the revenues tab, you want to find 9546. I apologize, it's written as 9545, but the DA restitution, I'm sorry,
Oh, no, you want a witness fee
95.60.
reimbursement. You were right with 95.60.
Yeah.
9560.
I
Thank
see
you.
that as 11,000.
11,000. I would recommend that we approve that as is.
Second.
Sorry, who was that? Oh, Mr. Crawford. Can't tell with the masks on. Sorry about that. So I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Mr. Majerus Collins?
Yeah, I mean, this obviously is not controversial, I just would make a point of order that it's not listed in the public agenda.
Aha.
They are, they aren't. For the sake of time, we cover them in the last night. And the concern that I have is that it's actually a shotgun actually revisiting that master list that we try to keep track of. And it puts Mr. Post and departments that are unfair disadvantage. If they're directly related to the divisions, I think it's a better approach to try to get some of these out of the way as we discuss the division.
I would also say the agenda is to review the budgets, and I think a budget is as much expenditure as revenue. So we can always review them in sum during that last night, but I think this is probably a better bookkeeping measure than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. I just think if we're gonna do it, we should probably say so.
Okay, during the next agenda that we send out, could we note that we will look at the related revenues at the same time? Is that sufficient?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Any further discussion? The motion is to approve revenues 9560 at 11,000. All those in favor? It appears unanimous, 12-0.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
to that point, I missed it on my last one, the DA's prior budget that we were just working on. We probably want to look at 9555, disposition. That would be on that same schedule. The deferred disposition is 50,000, it's recommended at 50,000. The question I have for Mr. Post, as long as it's tracking at the same level to be able to be in that dough yard and not unusually high or low, I would make the recommendation that we approve it as is at 50,000.
I'd second that.
Okay. Mr. Post, did you want to comment on that estimate that's in here?
That was the estimate given to us by District Attorney's Office.
Mr. DA, would you like to comment?
2020, these fees came in much lower, but I do expect for 2021 things will restore to normalcy. So I do think 50,000 is a reasonable recommendation.
Any further discussion? We have a motion on the table for revenues, 9555 at 50,000. All those in favor? Unanimous, 12-0. All right.
Thank you for both of those.
And we move on to 1013.
1013 is a position, we call it a restitution specialist. This is one that used to be partially funded by a grant, but it is somebody who works for all 3 counties and actually follows up when restitution has been ordered by the court for a case that's gone through our office, and our office is charged with collecting it. This is the individual that tracks it, makes sure payments are being made, and if they're not, drafts the motions and gets them to court, and has a remarkable impact on the amount of restitution we recover on behalf of victims. I would draw to your attention line 9545 under revenue. And the reason for that is because Franklin County and Oxford County provide a quarter of the salary each, and then half of the salary is covered by Androscoggin County. So this position is paid for under the Androscoggin County budget, but it's reimbursed 50% by the other 2 counties under that revenue line.
Mr. Titus.
Thank you, real quick. I've had occasion, this office seems to do a pretty good job, and I've actually had the occasion of people who have benefited from this, which is a good thing. My question is the restitution for crime or damage that's done by somebody who's convicted, can those expenses also be charged to that person, or as a percentage of what they pay back? For instance, if there's a payback for theft or damage?
You mean if there's a crime that involves property damage?
Yeah, for instance, it involves property damage or whatever, and so the restitution specialist is getting money to pay the victim.
Absolutely, that's
Right.
exactly what this
Is
position
it possible that money can be added to that person's payback to help pay for the restitution specialist?
You mean the salary of the restitution
Yeah.
specialist? I'd have to go look at the restitution statute. I'm not sure it's broad enough to allow for the paying of a position to collect the actual restitution. And I would also just add, the folks who are paying the restitution, it comes with a hardship, so I'm not 100% sure they have the means to do it. But that is, if you're sending me home with homework, I can go home and take a look
I
at the
think that's to
statute.
find out if that's possible, because anything would be better than nothing. Another $10,000 thrown in the pot, because we can collect it from those folks, would definitely be nice to have for next year. Sure.
I understand. I'm going to make it a research project. I'll call it the Titus Research Project.
There we go.
Is that going to cost us?
There's going to be a line item next year.
Right.
Oh, my God, yeah.
So that would be two, would be a 1013, we'd ask that the position continue to be funded, and then I guess what you'd want to do is look at 9545 under revenues.
Mr. Nichols?
Yeah, I was gonna make a motion that we go with the requested amount of 69,302.62. Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Nichols, seconded by Mr. Rennie. Any further discussion? All those in favor? 12-0, it's unanimous, and we'll jump to the revenues portion.
I make a motion that, we support the 34,652.
There's a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? 12-0, it's unanimous. And we've got one more with you, 10-18? No, two more.
I think there's two more. 1018 is our joint budget. We were asked to reduce this budget back to the amount of 14,600, which was the 2020 budget, so it was flatlined. We made those cuts, and so the joint budget is an example of where there are some areas where all three counties have a common interest in collecting the funds and then paying for an expense. And these are those items that we do that with. And so it's a flat line or the same budget as last year.
I make a motion that, we support $14,600. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rennie, seconded by Mr. Nichols. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? 12-0.
And then finally, line 1019 is a victimless advocate grant in our office. This grant is one that's been around for quite a while, and I would point you to revenue line 1019. 1019 is the federal funds that are used to reimburse a portion of this grant. And by the way, it's around $17,000 that gets reimbursed. The $55,000 that you see in the revenue line is actually, there's a victim witness advocate in each county, so it's divided by 3, and then each county gets a third of the $55,000. So the position is one that has been a long-standing position. It's kept separate from all the other salary lines because there is a level of reimbursement under that federal grant.
Would it be more appropriate for that revenue line to read just for our portion then?
Androscoggin County is the recipient, and then it pays
And
it
then,
out.
yeah, okay.
Because you have to have a,
Thank you.
So where do we show the payout?
Yeah.
what's that?
Where do we show the payout? I mean, obviously, we have a revenue line, but is there a place where we see the
Where it
payout
meets the
made?
budget.
Should be a line item, I would think, in the budget somewhere.
Where you see?
Top line, the top line on the budget.
3105.
So, yeah.
So 3105 is the payback on the
Take that out,
contract.
yes.
And then the line below that is our salaries.
Very good, thank you.
That answers my question too, because why is that one not, it's a salary listed account, but it doesn't have a 3% increase, so I was gonna ask that same question.
That's why I bring Clarice to all of our budgets.
So we're like, oh, Mr. Pearl, sorry about that.
Just a quick question. One of the other grants you mentioned that Franklin and Oxford, they receive a quarter, but this one's only a third.
This was done by thirds.
So why is that? What's the difference?
It's the way the grant was written, and the actual allocation that's done under the grant that governs the thirds. Typically, whenever we deal with an expense, we do it based on the number of cases that are coming in, and so it's always been quarter, 50. In this one, it's thirds.
Does that match the workload for this one?
It's more about, it matches the salary costs for each county, so not the workload though. When it's correlated to workload, it's always been 25,
Will there be
25.
an opportunity to readdress that grant in the future?
We've always treated that grant as one of those don't poke the bear. It's been going on for so long. Every year, the demands become greater and greater on how we track it and what we have to show them. So we worry at some point they're going to say, we're just not funding it anymore. But it's certainly something I don't mind talking to grant administrators about and asking them. You realize I'm going to be having a conversation with the budget committee in Oxford County, and they're not going to want to hear, well, we're stopping the thirds, and we're going to go, good news is Franklin County's budget's already been through, because they do the fiscal year, so.
Any further questions? Mr. Majerus, comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the lodging line, because it seems like in 2019, the last pre-pandemic year, $330 spent on lodging, and obviously nothing this year, not a surprise. Your request was $315, and now we're seeing the commissioners nothing.
Is that an important thing that you're losing there?
The only facet of that is the question of grants have to have matching funds, and I always considered the lodging to be part of the matching funds, and I actually need to go double check that, and in my head, when it was decided that it was going to be cut, was one, I'm not even sure what 2021 looks like as far as lodging and travel goes. And then if I have to go find $315, you know how you do it. You do it with rentals, like office space per square foot or phone usage. I have to go try to find something else to replace it. That's how I can look at that. This is not one that causes me to lose sleep, or I'll find it, figure it out.
To that point, no,
Go ahead.
I was the one that brought that up at the actual meeting, the fact that one of the biggest challenges for the coming year is going to be anything that's training in general. So it was the target for the night. We'll see that in some of these, because you're going to see a lot more virtual, because we've just proved it in the last 6 months that we can actually do it without sending somebody.
Sure.
I do not have a motion on the table as far as I know.
I'll entertain it as is, 86, 736, 36.
Second.
Got a motion by Mr. Ward, seconded by Mr. Rennie. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? 12-0, and we'll go to the revenues portion. For line 1019.
Motion that we support $55,000.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? 12-0, it's unanimous. Thank you for that. I just have one question, Andy, before you part us. Are the other, so you said Franklin County is on their fiscal year. Is Oxford County doing the same sort of cut effort, or?
I am meeting with them on, I think, September 28th or 29th. I'll be able to answer that for you. The budget we have submitted reflects a lot of trying to maintain status quo or cutting, but we have not had a mandate come down saying this is what your budget has to look like.
Okay, thank you for that insight.
Yeah.
Cool.
If I just
Yeah.
say to the group, this budget experience for me, I didn't know what to expect this evening, and I will tell you, I'm leaving here feeling more empowered than when I walked through the door. Because even though I know the result is the cuts are there, it does feel like there was a conversation, and I understand the tough decisions you're having to make, and I appreciate you listening to me while I talk about what impact it had. So thank you. I'm going to tell all my county friends to come see you.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. We'll move to building and facilities. Also our cameraman for the night, so we'll do that. He does it all.
Put it on auto.
There's an entry for that way, yeah.
Good evening.
Can I ask one?
Yeah, sure thing.
I asked the question of the commissioners that night. They went through the cuts that you see before us. They cut $46,300, which on this budget it's a minus 4.62% for the coming year over last. Asked Dave one question associated with it: is it sustainable? I don't care on this one with the infrastructure that Dave is actually having to deal with. Is this budget sustainable? And his response was?
So my response was, we can get away with it some, but at some point we have to continue the trend to keep the repairs up, which we'd only do on a schedule. Essentially, you can't forget about the roofs. We have a lot of them. You have to schedule them out just like replacing a car. Same thing with painting. It's the same thing with flooring. It's, the place gets used. We have to keep it on a schedule and keep things going and keep them replaced. It's just like what the DA was saying about computers. He's going every 4 years, he's going to push it every 5 years. So what the commissioners have voted on is to cut my capital. And what that would do is that would cut the roofs. Again, give it over to some. We'll keep the repairs going. But we do have to get back on track a year from now. I mean, I'm pretty good about going duct tape. But at some point, we need to continue the trend. We've done it the past couple of years doing roofs. I'm just using roofs as an example. But we need to continue that in the future.
Mr. Pelletier, did you have any hand raised?
I'd just like to ask Mr. Ward if he could speak into the microphone.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure. And is everyone's mic turned on?
All the others turn on automatically, only those two have to be physically turned on.
Okay, so we
They're
did
light
that.
on, they're good.
Great, thank you.
I apologize, I hear the same criticism of Elizabeth.
All right, further questions on budget 1040, Mr. Hill?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you sort of the same question I asked you. Are any of these cuts just absolutely preposterous that if you could pick which one it was, that you'd like to see the funding go back, and it was in our power to do that, that it'll actually save us money in the long run?
So the way the commissioners cut my capital, they just cut a dollar amount. They didn't cut any one item. So essentially, I can use that in my favor and do the projects that I believe are more
By
important.
priority, yeah. Excellent.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Ward, yes.
To Dave's point, one of the things that I wanted to point you guys to is the capital plan that's in here. There are at least 2 divisions now, and Dave specifically, that have been cut. The numbers that are in here are what was originally proposed. We need to eventually catch up with that. Forgive me, it's capital improvements, like the 6th tab in. The district attorney, the copier lease for 5,000 was cut. The monitors and tables, that was cut to 8,708. And now Dave has 27,700 available for discretion for him to be able to pick within that list, because they cut a flat amount. That's his point.
Mr. Hill?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that building improvement line. It appears the commissioners are aligning what they're providing you with what you're expending each year. If you look back in 2019, the budget was 80,000, but only about 23,000 was spent. And then again, year to date this year, we're only spending 3,000 so far, of the $68,000 budget. I mean, are you on track to spend all of that this year?
Especially the administrator related to that. Well, some of that, the 2018, that got kicked over to 2019, and that was all spent. And what's being spent, some of that was obviously delayed, and there is, help me out here.
So one of the projects was essentially, again, the roofing project by chance. Because the scheduling of the contractors doing the work, we had to postpone it to 2019, and we did it early this year, 2020. So at some point, you should be able to see that in your expenditures report for this year. But it was last year's funding.
So in the, Larry, for the FY19, well, your calendar year 19, you're saying the 23,000 wasn't the actual, you had a carryover into 2020?
Yes.
Yeah. It's carried over.
But we're not seeing it yet.
No, because it still shows as the 2019 carried instead of in the 2020 budget.
And just to that point, so if we're looking at 7205, the 27,700 is what you plugged in, Dave, as a result of the overall cuts to the 1040 budget, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that was the choice you made.
Correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I saw other hands. Mr. Tice?
Just one clarification too, because I know one of the reasons that's lower is because you haven't reserve account that's been traditionally used for building repairs. So I assume a lot of the expenses, like if you're replacing a floor, the money from that comes out of the building reserve, if there is one. So it looks like 2020 there was one, but then it's an expenditure. Is there anything left in the building after this budget? Is there anything in the building reserve fund? Building improvement reserve fund?
$5,411.
And that's all, right? And that's because we spent what was left, and that's why it doesn't reflect in the spending here. It's the building. So I guess what determines what is spent out of line number 7205 and what comes out of this reserve account?
I think that's how the commissioners decide to.
That it's budgeted here, it's intended to actually be used, you would actually see a reduction in that reserve account.
Right.
Because they would use that, because
That's why it wouldn't show up in this line number 7205.
Correct.
Because it was taken from our
Correct.
reserve account. We don't have a reserve account for 2021.
not, it's intended to be used as presented by the commissioner's budget that's before us tonight. Correct.
So we don't have the, looking at this other study, we have this capital budget for 2020. We don't have a 2021. Right, we just have it for 2020. I know it's typically had this another night.
I don't know what you have in front of you, sorry. No, this is the 2021 that
The reserve, I'm looking at the reserve accounts.
Okay, reserve accounts.
But I don't have a 2021 reserve account, I show a 2020. I was wondering if we, I understand we use some reserve accounts to help.
There's only like $8,000 in a building reserve account currently. There was $400,000, and we used $100,000 of it for this year's budget. But that's a reserve account, that's a general reserve, county reserve account as opposed to a building or a capital account.
To the point, Mr. Titus, the commissioners actually chose not to touch that. They touched two other aspects. They touched an additional $50,000 of the surplus and $150,000 of the fund balance, which is why tonight when you guys all came in, there's a fund balance page that was sitting on your desks. At least you had an idea before that action is what was available for use for that intended purpose.
So this 27,000, line 7205, that's it. There's no other money to be spent on building improvements except for the 27,000, which is basically band-aid this year. Correct?
Essentially, that's correct.
Mr. Major responds.
I find this incredibly irresponsible on the part of the county commission. We are sitting in a building that has served this county since before the Civil War, and it has been handed down to us from generations of folks in New Stratford County in various states of good shape, okay shape, but serviceable shape. And we have a responsibility not only to pass it on in as good a shape as we found it, but in fact improve it so that it will continue to last far into the future. This is buildings on the National Register of Historic Places, the point of pride for the city of Auburn, for the community of Lewis and Auburn, and the entire county. And it is the definition of penny wise and pound foolish to skimp on building repairs. So I would move that we restore the full amount to line 7205 and bring that back to 74,000.
I have a motion, do I hear a second? I will throw a second behind that. Any discussion on adding, oh gosh, quick math.
46,300.
Were you motioning on 7205 or on the whole budget, Mr. Richards?
My understanding is that that's the only source of cuts in the budget.
Oh, okay,
What is it?
thank you. So, we have a motion to restore $46,300. Any discussion? Mr. Hill?
You didn't see me,
Oh,
I was
sorry.
willing to second it, but I guess what I'd like to say is, I mean, having run businesses in this area since I was 18, or owned businesses, a lot of times you have to, prioritize, people are hurting right now, and we have to find ways to save money. I've known David Cody, his brother and his sister for many, many years. He was actually my maintenance man. If anybody can, prioritize and find a way to keep us running, you know, with a little less green, it's them, it's David. So I have full confidence that he'll be able to do this. So even though I'm willing to support the motion, I won't be voting for it. I specifically asked him if there was anything that he thought he needed, and I hope that he would, and I know he would, knowing this whole thing, that he would have told me, you know, I probably could use this much more. You know, in order to keep things up to snuff, I just can't do it with $47,000. That not being said, I'll leave it at that.
Any further discussion? I'm sorry?
I could help her.
Oh, yeah, Mr. Ward.
I don't disagree on maintenance. I made my point originally because Dave weighed in associated with that. He says it's sustainable for 1 year. I would support that. The bigger limitation that I would actually point out here tonight is that the 5-year capital plan tab in our books is blank. And I would like to actually have that content if we could to the next meeting.
Here's the problem we have with the capital plan, 5-year capital plan, is we're taking things out to put into the bond issue and looking at. One of the problems with the 5-year capital plan was that, for example, year after next, Dave had $500 and some odd thousand to spend. Well, you know, I know, and Dave knows that he's not going to get $500,000 to spend. So we're in the process of trying to revise that to the point of, okay, what needs to go into bond issue, and some of that was in the 5-year plan. So we're trying to revise that whole thing. Hopefully we'll have it for you, if not next meeting, by the meeting after.
Okay. I would applaud that effort because the concern that I have in having sat here for 5 years is year 1 never actually elevates to year 2 or vice versa. The fact that there's no demonstrated intent of a 5-year plan at the county level. It's a wish list and it doesn't work for my children at Christmas, it doesn't work for a county.
That has been a problem, and I've recognized that problem, and one of the things that I have done in the past is had realistic 5-year plans. The problem has come that we're so far behind, and we need so much that the 5-year plan, for example, the things that need to happen in heating and air conditioning, cooling, and so on and so forth, it's going to cost $2.5 million. The downstairs renovation that needs to happen at $1.5 million. You know, some of those you can put in a 5-year plan, but like I said, and Dave doesn't want to ignore it, as though it doesn't exist, because it does exist. It needs to happen. It needs to happen relatively quickly. But anyway, make a long story short, we're still looking at trying to make that make sense.
So, sorry, is that, when you're saying bonding, that's obviously going to have to go before voters on.
Yes.
We just missed the November timeframe, so we're talking a year from November at this point? Because that's
We've got to look at, it says that any county bond issue has to go before a statewide election, and whether there's going to be a statewide one this November, we're not sure yet. Normally there is, but we'll have to find out.
This November?
I
don't
mean,
think-
the following, next year.
Thank you for
2021.
the clarification, because there's no way you're going to make a ballot. I was already going to shoot.
We're talking, this
2021.
budget we're talking about.
Okay.
So the unfortunate thing there would be that you're missing presidential associated with that, and I'm hopeful they'll pick it up in a non-presidential year and still have it be able to carry at the county level. It's a bold strategy at times.
Yeah, and we were looking at this year, wanting to do it this year, and obviously, things happen, it just,
No, I don't disagree, but we've been hearing the same thing for 3 years.
Mr. Titus?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate what Mr. Wood was talking about. I've heard the story too, and I think it's a good thing that we look at potential bonding only because we've had reserve accounts, and the reserve accounts get dwindled when something happens or whatever in the past. I'm going back 4, 5, 6 years ago. So when we have reserve accounts, we end up using them for other things. And so the reserve account process isn't working when you need $500,000 or $1 million. So we either do without, or we try to charge in 1 year $1 million worth of repairs, and we know we can't do that. So I really look forward to seeing this proposing. I mean, as long as bonding is a 10-year or longer item gets bonded, but I don't want to see a carpet get bonded because that's not a 10-year or more item type thing. I look forward to seeing the plan. Obviously, the reserve accounts are not working, so we need to find some balance between reserve accounts and bonding to get stuff done.
I haven't been to this point simply because, we're trying to catch up and to get reserve accounts, bring our fund balance up and all of that, and keep taxes at a, reasonable level. And it's a struggle to try to find that right balance, and we haven't got there yet.
We do have a motion on the table. Any further discussion? And this is to restore the budget to 2021 request. Seeing none, all those in favor? Oh,
You're saying we're restoring the whole budget line item?
They're one and the
It's
same.
one, there's only one cut in this budget, and it's that one line item.
Yeah.
Yes,
So the vote is to put it to the manager's request rather than the commissioner's.
yeah.
Correct, yes. All those in favor? I see 3. All those opposed? I see 9. The motion fails.
But it was on the list for the last night.
Yes. Is there any further discussion, or do we want to move on?
I will make the motion to pass this budget as is, it's full for 319.
Okay, everyone's real excited about that. Any further discussion on this budget? Seeing none at the commissioner's budget request level, all those in favor? And that is 12-0, so we will not vote on that again. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much.
Normally we would be calling Dave back for this one, but we've got Mr. Butler, correct?
Yes.
So we're looking at budget 1060 IT. Mr. Butler is new to us this year, but
Those who haven't met yet, my name is Douglas Butler, and I've been on staff since June 1st as Director of IT.
sure, what's in here?
Thank you. I'm new to this process, so I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm here to tell you about the changes that were made from what I originally proposed to what was done at the commissioner's meeting. Is that correct?
That'd be great, thank you.
Okay. The result of the commissioner's meeting was to, in net, reduce the request from 170 to 6761 to a level of $160,000. And I did that with a few changes. If you bear with me, I'm flipping through some pages here. Under account number 1060, 4015, the consulting line, there were 2 projects that I reduced out at the commissioner's request, and a small change to one of the other line items that I have in my notes, netting $5,950 reduction from what I had originally proposed, down to $19,300.
Can you speak to what those changes were, because you referenced it in your backup, and I appreciate the backup. You don't give us an idea of what those items were in the cost, if you would.
Yep, there were 2 projects in particular that I had anticipated hiring some resources, some consulting resources to assist with carrying out. One was a planned computer imaging project. Right now, we don't enjoy the ability to replicate a standard PC image out to all the 100+ computers in the environment. It makes it very difficult to manage, and in particular, very difficult if we should have any kind of an outbreak of a virus or anything like that. I don't know what's out there to go and remediate in a quick fashion. That's something that I think we may be able to achieve with one of the other projects that's also in the budget, so that was an area where I felt like I could make a reduction without too much pain. The second item was a little bit more involved, and it's a project that I just think in balance, given the fact that we've got the pressures that we've got on the budget this year, is something that we can probably postpone. And that was a $4,000 allocation for 30 hours of consulting labor to do something called network segmentation. Basically, our Ethernet, our computer network right now, is pretty much one giant borderless network amongst all the departments and all the features and functions that are going on. Those of you who remember back many years to when Target had its outbreak and had its problem with some number of millions of dollars of different credit card records that were stolen by a bad actor, that actually came as a result of their HVAC network being in the same network as their point of sale network, and a virus that was introduced by an HVAC vendor and going on to their point of sale. So this, anyway, that's the point I'm trying to make, is that that project is something that I still think will be in the future, but it's not something that I think is a priority for this year. So I was able to reduce that item. And then I just made a reduction of $500 based on miscellaneous troubleshooting outside expenses. I think given the pressures on the budget, we took that from $3,000 down to $2,500. I still think it's a reasonable number.
So, back to the same question, I guess, it's still an increase over last year, $16,300.
Yep. So I can
What is in this year that isn't been addressed for the listening dog?
Yep. The bulk of the increase there, in fact, 100% of the increase, I would say, is that I've made a requisition, and I had some discussions there about actually a larger number, but we came back to a little bit of what might be reasonable and achievable. I'm requesting a budget amount of $16,800 to go out to bid for a block of 8 hours per month of engineering labor, engineering support. And that would be for various things, but mostly it's as a one day a month to bring in a consulting resource to sit with me and to do normal checks on the environment, but also to consult on some things that come up during the period of time that maybe I either don't have the skill set or need some additional support to troubleshoot out. But the truth of the matter is that it's just a good idea to not put all of your eggs in one basket, no matter how great I think I am, and I do think I'm pretty great. It's good to have somebody else who's a second person who's familiar with the environment, knows where all the documentation is, and would be a resource in the event that I should not be available or should be on vacation or whatever. So that's the idea, is to go out for a block of hours. It would come to, I'm estimating $175 per hour for that sort of labor. 8 hours per month for the course of the year. Does that answer your question, Mr. Mayor?
It does, thank you.
Further questions for Mr. Butler? Mr. Titus?
Thank you. Yeah, I would have a question on that too. Larry, you had a chance to, you understand that this is going to be an ongoing thing. 16,000, whatever, we want to charge us for 8 hours a month to consult generally. Is that something you see as permanent expense now, or is this just to fix a problem, or is this something we need to do all the time?
There's a whole host of issues that we have not been addressing over the last number of years. And we've sort of been just running by the seat of our pants, dealing with issues as they come up. But one of the things that Mr. Butler is doing is looking at issues before they arise. And he certainly has had his many days of issues as they're coming up. When at 5 o'clock in the morning he gets a call that the system is down, and he's got to have it up and running because the system, which includes our 911 system and so on, some of those computers. And so part of what that is to and security is a big issue as well. And so having somebody looking at all of the things that are happening is a wise investment. It really is. And one of the things that I have said was, and I said in the commissioners meeting, was that there's another county that I'm aware of. They have a 5-member IT department, and they spend roughly $600,000 a year. Whereupon one of my commissioners said, well, not every county is that, rich and so on. And I will tell you that that's one of the poorest counties in the state. So we have been plugging along fortunately, without a great deal of breakdowns and things that could happen. But we're starting to see that we need to come to the next level. So,
Well, like I said, I'm a little concerned, because IT always, I take a look at it with a different eye, because I don't understand why it keeps, like, for instance, there's another item that talks about service contracts, tremendous increase, and every year we see, both in the city, but I see it in the county, every year we get these tremendous increases in contracts for computers. And so we continue to pay more and more and more, and it seems like we get the same thing. So I'm a little concerned about the spending the money on the consultant, not knowing exactly what it's going to be for, just generally, 8 hours of help a month. And then I look at these maintenance contracts and say, when we sign up with somebody, do they agree to tell us that, well, we're going to go up double next year. So this is what it is now. Double next year, it'll be double, and next year after that, it'll be another 50% increase. It just seems like that's what happens. And this is one of the only budgets that we're seeing a significant increase. Everybody else is really kind of flat with me this year. So I just really want to look at this.
Mr. Butler.
Yeah, Mr. Titus, thank you for comments on that. I think specifically referring to the area of line item 4670 service contract.
Yeah, look at that, and it's, 18,000, 11,000 was what the 2019 budget was.
And what I'll tell you is that some of those things, a significant portion of that is things that I found that were lapsed, that were really items that I think in my professional recommendation, I would not be comfortable operating a shop without a maintenance contract on, for example, your Ethernet networks. We don't have that today. That's a $3,000 line item. We had software that we had bought in years past, which has since become obsolete, which if we had been paying maintenance contracts on that software, we would have not only the benefit of the version updates, which would be entitled to, but also picking up the phone and calling for support in the event that we run into a problem that local staff are not capable with or need support on. This is your commentary earlier, sir, with regard to things that are penny wise and pound foolish. I think that not the words.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
This would be an area where I would counsel that is maintenance contracts. I'll give you an example. At the casino when I worked there, over 60% of my budget, over $600,000 a year, was nothing but maintenance contracts on software. Now, I'm not certainly proposing that level of expenditure here for the town. It's just not the same operation. But I would tell you that maintaining maintenance contracts and maintenance agreements on the pieces that you have in place that you consider critical to your operation, which I would tell you that most of this really is critical, I think is essential. Not going with a maintenance contract, I think is an area where you're just shooting yourself in the foot. Not only are you exposing yourself to an outage today, but you're eventually going to have to pay that bill when you have to upgrade, which you could have done by having maintenance on the software to begin with. So, if that's helpful.
Oh, there's a lot. I saw Mr. Kroll before.
Thank you. One, welcome to the county.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the detailed work on this, and I think taking those steps to get us where we need to be is important. My question is, how much are you actually breaking out what should be potentially built towards communications? And instead, it's in this budget here. Meaning like your time, how are you breaking some of that out? And then also, are there any consulting service agreements, anything else in here for this budget that really should be under communications?
I'm not sure help me out, I'm not sure where communications would be this IT. I think that's the same budget as far as I'm concerned. Not trying to avoid your question, but I don't.
That's a great answer.
Mr. Post just said that one of the key points is that you have the 911 in here. The fact is the 911 would be directly under the communication budget.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think, to answer your question, and again, recognize that I've been here for, I think, about 115 days now, so I'm still learning my job. So, if you'll allow that, to that degree. A lot of those components, the IMC, for example, and it's used by the Communications Center, those are not carried within my budget. Those are carried within the communications and the sheriff's budget. These are more of the infrastructure items, networks, telephones, software for virtual infrastructure, that sort of thing, more so than what's used in the Communications Center. Am I answering your question?
You are. And what I would recommend then to the administrator is how can we start breaking some of that out so when we actually look at communications costs, 911 Center, we're actually looking at true cost and not other amounts that are in this budget because we are building out for some of our 911 services that I think we'll address later on and stuff, but if we're not capturing the full amount, then we're not seeing the offset.
I understand. So I think if I'm understanding your question, then costs that are in my budget that could be apportioned out, for example, to communications and then like generates revenue from telecom. I understand.
I think I saw Mr. No? You're all set, Mr. Held?
Yeah, I got one question and another statement. First of all, the statement, last year, when David was taking care of this, he was doing it and trying to, and these same type of issues came up. Because that I owned server companies with servers all over the world, and my wife actually is a CFO, and a lot of people don't understand just how much work goes into, just how critical these systems are without service contracts. You are basically just gambling, and because, let's say for instance, if my wife's system goes down, the point of sale, their business is shut out. You know, that's it. They've got no sales, send everybody home. It's not like the olden days when we, you know, could just write things out with a piece of paper. I just wanted to make sure that you thought that this was enough to basically ward off, you know, any unforeseen, or did you feel like you had any pressure to keep it down? Because, like I said, I think Dave did the best he could, but clearly he's trying to, you know, keep this beautiful building up to snuff and, you know, take care of the IT. It's a lot to ask of anyone.
I think to respond to your question, I think there are certainly things that, and I don't want to scare anyone on the budget committee or the commissioners. There are certainly things that in future years I'm going to recommend. Whether they find support or not is another matter. But I'm also a realist. One, on the current situation budget-wise, but two, on the fact that there's only so much that even if we gave all the resources in the world, there's only so much we could achieve in the next 18 months. To answer your question, not everything that I think we need to do is in this budget, but everything that I think is both reasonable, achievable in a year and a half, and I think is something that I would recommend in terms of budget support is here.
Yeah.
Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Titus?
Well, I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I'm not saying it's not essential. What I'm saying is every year we see doubling, quadrupling, and tripling of service contracts. So what was good last year is not good this year. Why is it that we have to have all these mushrooming budgets for IT when I would think we would at least stabilize it some and know what we need year over year, not have.
I think what you said was,
Part of that-
some stuff just was overlooked.
Can we wait for a development from the chair?
Part of that reason is because Bill Gates is trying to be a trillionaire, not just a billionaire.
Well, we're being passive. We say, okay, yeah, whatever you want, we get it.
Mr. Pettingill?
So I'm not advocating for an increase in this year, given the circumstances, but this is probably a department that could use an increase year over year. More to the point of why everything essentially doubles. The technology, 6 months out, it's already so far out of date that's not even funny. There's a mathematical equation that we've now passed the point that it's days of technology is out of date. More to the point with this, every problem that comes up compounds at least 3 times because you've got to take the time to acknowledge it, fix it, and then if you don't do that, you've got to deal with the problem that creates to then create that problem. So kudos to what you're doing, with the circumstances that we have in the system that we're dealing with. So I just wanted to acknowledge what you're doing, but it is something we should look at in future years to do more with.
Something else sustainable.
That's technology.
The other thing that I would like to mention as well, and I mentioned it I think last week, is that we're in the process, have all the parts come in yet?
Yeah, they are.
Of putting in a new server. The old server actually is pretty well died, and that's going to be happening here in the next couple of months, and so that's part of the process that we're going through as well.
Mr. Ward?
I'm gonna play devil's advocate tonight, in the fact that 2018, this division had a budget of $72,000. 2019, it went to $86,000. Last year, it's $125,000. This year, it's flatlined at $160,000, which is a 27.8% increase. I don't disagree that things have been kept to a point where you can't actually, you have to invest, but 30% in 1 year, I question that.
Here's how I would respond to that. You can, if you're paying somebody to do your yard work, and you're paying them $5 an hour, and you give them a raise, and you pay them $10 an hour, you have given them 100% raise. But you're still below minimum wage. So sometimes those percentages are, are deceiving because the need was there, part of the need was there, and wasn't being met years ago. And right up until now, we're discovering that, you really got to meet the needs, and we should have been meeting, as in many of the cases within the county, in many of the departments, those needs should have been met a long time ago.
I don't disagree, but I'll counter, because I just looked it up. You presented us a budget last year with a new department head of $54,780. You couldn't find one for that, and you are budgeting a 3% increase across the board. This division's coming in at 9.4%. So you've already put him at a disadvantage
Right.
associated with that, dropping this down to a 30% increase this year. That point that Mr. Titus is making is valid.
Mr. Majerus comments.
So I want to ask about the financial risks associated with underfunding IT, because, we hear stories about municipalities, counties, sometimes even states, that are subject to cyber attacks that end up costing them a tremendous amount of money and making them non-functional for days, weeks, sometimes even months. And so I guess in trying to help my colleagues understand the importance of this, could you walk us through some of the risks we take in underfunding IT?
I think that's a great point. I think I don't want to scare anybody or regale you with the tales of the Target breach that occurred years ago. That's one example of many in the commercial world, but as you mentioned, there's been an uptick in, especially recently, municipal and state and local government attacks. I think everybody's aware that Augusta had an issue in the last year. I worked for Maine PERS for almost 3 years, and that was a constant source of work for us to work with our constituent groups who were suffering from breaches and that sort of thing. That risk is out there. There was a state of emergency declared in the state of Louisiana last year, or the year before, I forget exactly when there was an outbreak of cyber attacks and ransomware situations. We're facing that risk. We're doing what we can with the resources that we're given. And again, I'm trying to keep the budget to what I think is reasonable, recognizing the fact where it's been before. I don't think this is sufficient to forestall every situation. I really don't. But I think that given the fact that where our level of maturity and preparedness is right now, I think this is a step in the right direction. But I don't think that we're there yet. So I don't know if I'm answering sufficiently what you're
No,
asking.
I think you are. I think sometimes it can be hard to conceptualize events that have a small risk of happening, but a tremendously detrimental effect when they do happen, and the cost-saving value in slightly reducing the likelihood that such an event would occur. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're looking at this, and I hope that you continue to try to get the county to a place where we have not only better and more up-to-date technology, but also technology that we can have greater confidence in, does not run the risk of being corrupted and breached by bad actors, whether we're talking about the sheriff's department where we have safety concerns, or so many other areas in county business where we simply can't afford to have, bad actors, hackers, and cyber attacks targeting the workings of county government. So I would make a motion that we accept the budget as presented to the commissioners, budget of $160,000.
I second that.
Great. I saw Mr. Lunt's hand up before.
No, my point was,
You're all set, okay.
I was also going to comment about the nature of cyber attacks, and that,
Yeah.
it's a serious threat that's just getting worse and worse every year. You can't say we're gonna spend what we spent in 2010 when the environment is a totally different situation now. You know, you have international actors attacking our systems from other countries that didn't happen 10 years ago.
I would take my moment to also really support this budget and note that I think we're going to continue to see these increases. You know, being in the age group that I'm within of millennials, one of the largest concerns besides, you know, our failing economy through recessions as we enter the workforce and racial disparities is also data security in this digital world we've been grown up in. And so I think we're only going to see exponential growth here, but I'm glad to see that you've scaled it back to what is reasonable. And to any hackers out there, this is not the place because we don't have any money. Got a motion and a second. Any discussion, Mr.
Make a
Kelly?
motion. We pass it as written.
Some of you are-
We have that on the table.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just one more discussion on it?
Yes, Mr. Brooks.
The other question was on the computer software hardware.
73, 35.
73, 75.
Okay.
So, like in 2019, it was 13,000, and last year it was 49, which we haven't spent yet. This year it's 43. What is that additional? Now, that's not service contracts, it can't be. So we're buying more equipment?
That's capital, and that's the replacement, as Barry mentioned. Since before I came on staff, we've been operating on a borrowed virtual infrastructure. Sorry about that, I'll start with my reading glasses. We've been operating on a borrowed virtual infrastructure. The county, the LA 911 center has lent us a server to get us by as a stopgap because the server we were operating on before, and anybody knows better than me can speak that up, failed some number of months ago. And this is the acquisition of a virtual infrastructure that covers that. So we were able to negotiate 0% financing over a 5-year lease purchase. And that's a little bit of an increase there over what was planned.
Yeah, I remember we voted on that as a payment plan. We did that last year. So this is the payments on the new server that we talked about last year. Is that much? $43,000? That's just the payments. Okay, I disagree. I know I agree with everybody saying here, I just don't think it's a blank check. And that, I've seen this from the city and everything, that this is gonna grow, and it just seems like it's gonna be a blank check, but not what it costs we need. I just get frustrated.
We have a motion and a second to approve this budget at $150,000. Any further discussion? Mr. Pettingill.
Just offer a comment, that nowadays, one avenue of cyber attack is all our appliances that we have in our homes. That wasn't an issue even 5 years ago. So as this landscape rapidly changes, we have to adapt. I don't think anybody ever imagined your refrigerator hacking your data, but it happens nowadays. So it's where we will forever be behind the eight ball trying to tackle this problem.
Mr. Hill?
Oh, I was just gonna say the same thing. It's more likely to be your TV though.
We don't have a TV or refrigerator.
All right. Any further discussion? Looks like we're ready. All those in favor? All those opposed? I see 10-2. Motion carries, but we'll revisit this budget on the last night. Thank you, Doug. Ms. Crafter. So it looks like you were reduced about $2,000?
Yes, my original budget that went to the commissioners increased by $22.40. That was all in salaries due to the cost of living steps increase. I had lowered as much as I could to bring it to the $22.40. The commissioners lowered it to $165,000, so I went ahead and reduced further. So it's actually lower than 2000. That's $520.
And that's the mileage, meals, lodging were
Yeah,
given
yeah.
as suggestions, is that due to not attending conferences, that sort of thing?
Right, I'm doing anything
in favor? Unanimous. Move on to auditing. 1090.
Motion to adopt that.
Second.
At 12,500. Any questions, discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous, 12-0. Interest, 2,000.
I'll make a motion for the 80,000. Second.
Any discussion?
Can we revisit this at the last night, because it's doubled up, the discussion night of was a reduction to 20,000 you see here, because we have a reliance less on a TAN at the county level. If that looks even more favorable, there may be some money to be able to have a reduction. I'd recommend revisiting this that night, last night.
Sure thing.
Second.
I lost track. Do I have a motion?
You do.
Yes, in a second, great. For 80,000, we'll plan to revisit this based on Mr. Wood's comments. Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous, 12-0. And we'll tackle insurance, 2050.
I would make the same motion to see if we can't squeak this towards the last night. We typically take action on that at the last night, just for that reason. So as is for right now, we're hopeful better information coming from the treasurer.
I'll second that.
Any questions?
I just have another quick question.
Yes.
Just when I'm looking at the 2019 expended and then 2020 budget, what was the cause of the increase in, for instance, the total price? Was there any specific thing that just insurance companies, or we had a lot of usage on?
The anticipated increase in rate was really what it was driven by.
So like expended in 2019 was 79,000, so it'll be 102 total. Is what the insurance companies are telling us, this is a guess, or?
At this point, it's a guess.
That's
They're
all
still in
it
the
is,
process.
yeah. Hopefully it's lower.
So, do we know the worker comp increase for the coming year?
No, we haven't had that.
Same thing, because it's usually in the January timeframe, so we probably won't even know that by the end of this.
Any further discussion? Motion is to approve as is. All those in favor? 12-0. And we'll revisit this on the last night. Do I hear a final motion?
Can I have a question first?
Sure.
My last request is Mr. Post for the night, the wage detail that we were provided last year, which
We are currently working on that, and we're hoping to have it tonight. We'll have it next week.
much appreciated.
So we detail probably next week by your plan, 2 weeks from now. Is that accurate?
That was what I was planning.
Okay,
I'm good.
that's the plan.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Okay, any further, Mr. Pearl?
If I could also ask, based on my request on that, if we could take the time to actually look at even the sheriff's department budget and really focus on communications. I don't believe that any administrative costs, and I'm sure the sheriff spends time dealing with communication issues, so we're not breaking that out. We're just breaking that out to a true communication budget. I think we can.
And I think I mentioned too, the reserve accounts, just 21 numbers. We have 2020 here, but we have nothing to.
There's no sheet for 2021.
On reserve accounts.
All right. So we've got, we're gonna revisit the IT budget based on the quote count, interest, insurance, reserve account for 2021, IT being broken out into other departments. Any further notes? All right, now I will accept Mr. Rennie's initial. Do I have a second? Second from Mr. Hill. All those in favor of adjournment? It is unanimous. Thank you all.